Okay, example 3 takes us back to what we did in 5.2. They gave us a trig function and asked us to find another trig function, right? Or in this case, tangent theta, find this and this. So they're asking us to find a couple, all right? But now sines are going to be involved, and before it was always an acute angle, so it was in the first quadrant. We didn't have to concern ourselves with all that kind of stuff. So the first thing I want to do is establish what quadrant I'm in, and then the tangent expression there, this right here, is going to help me draw a right triangle to represent it. But I want to draw it in the correct quadrant, so I want to figure out the quadrant first. And that's just what example 2 was. It just so happens I know the exact value of tangent, but it's negative, right? So the fact they're giving me tangent of theta is less than 0. That tells me I'm either in the second quadrant or the fourth quadrant, because that's where tangent is negative. They also tell me that sine of theta is negative. They don't tell me the actual sine value, but that's not important. The fact they gave me the tangent value, I can draw a triangle, right? So it doesn't really matter. They didn't tell me that part. Sine's negative in the third and fourth quadrants. All right. So if tangent's negative and sine is negative, that tells me that we're in the fourth quadrant. All right. So once I've established what quadrant I'm in, I want to draw an x and y axis to establish quadrants. And very good one there. I can draw it like that, but which quadrant do I want? The fourth. So I might even just draw it like that. So I'm just focusing on the fourth quadrant, because that's the one I care about. All right? So I want to draw my triangle in there, so I'm going to just come off the origin into the fourth quadrant. And to scale somewhat, if you want, -7/5, it might be a little lower than it is across. It doesn't have to be drawn to scale to be able to do it. Just believe in what you wrote and you'll be fine. And then if I go ahead and connect from the end of this vertically to the x-axis to create a right triangle out of it. Now we know tangent is the opposite over the adjacent, right? So if this is theta, excuse me, if that's theta, the opposite side's measure is 7, the adjacent side's measure is 5. Notice I just put numbers there right now, I didn't worry about the sign. All right. Once I establish the correct number for each one, now I have to get the correct sign for each one. I'm going to the right for this, that's a +5. I'm going down for this, that's a -7. So again, the trig value, the fraction they give you establishes how long the sides are. The direction you're going establishes which one should be positive, which should be negative. And you can see very clearly if I was doing tangent to this angle, negative over positive creates a negative fraction. So the correct sign is right there. Then it's basically the same problem the first problem we saw today was. We have a right triangle, okay? We need to find the hypotenuse, so let's just call the hypotenuse x again. X squared is equal to 5 squared plus 7 squared. And again, notice, even though this is negative, this is positive, when you square, they're always positive. 25 and 49 make 74. So x is going to equal the square root of 74. And again, the hypotenuse is always positive, never negative. All right. So we have the square root of 74 as the hypotenuse. Now, our directions are to find the cosine of theta and to find the cosecant of theta. So I'm going to find cosine of theta, that's easy enough. If this is my angle, this is the opposite side, this is the hypotenuse, this is the adjacent, right? Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, that's going to be +5 over positive square root of 74. We multiply top and bottom by the square root of 74, we're going to get 5 times the square root of 74 over 74. If they asked me to do one of the reciprocal functions, which they did, I would go ahead and find the regular function first, and then I'd reciprocate it. So I'm going to figure out sine of theta, which is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. Now keep in mind, that's not the best final answer for sine, right? I'm not trying to find sine, I'm finding sine to find cosecant. All right? So the fact that I know what sine is leads me to the fact that cosecant of theta would be negative the square root of 74 over 7. Cosine theta equals 5 square root of 74 over 74. Cosecant equals negative square root of 74 over 7. Square root of 74 over -7 is also correct. I like my minuses on the top, so I put it there. So when you reciprocate, the sign stays the same. If you want to put square root of 74 over negative 7, you're not wrong. So, again, that's the challenge of today. Basically, being able to identify different trig values based on a triangle you can create in some manner. All right, so whether they tell you where the terminal side goes through some point, you can find it that way. If they tell you something about a trig function and they give you enough information to tell what quadrant you're in. One thing, an example problem did not handle this, but they do this sometimes also on these problems in the homework. They might say that pi over 2 is less than theta is less than pi. So they'll say tangent of theta equals negative 7/5 and that. All right, and all of a sudden, well, we didn't do a problem like that, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. So it's either in the second or fourth quadrant, right? Keep in mind, if we're dealing with radians from the other day, 0 radians, pi over 2 radians, pi radians, 3 pi over 2 radians, and 2 pi radians. All that's on your formula sheet on the radian, that unit circle I've got on the back underneath all the trig values, right? Okay, pi over 2 to pi, that means that we're in this quadrant here. So that just means that I'm going to draw my triangle here. 7 goes there, negative 5 goes there. This will be the square root of 74 this time. Now we're in the second quadrant. Or they might say that 270 degrees is less than theta is less than 360 degrees. Now we're in this quadrant. So they're either going to give you the quadrant by giving you two trig values, signs, and you can establish a quadrant that way, or they're going to give you some kind of an interval like this to tell you what quadrant you're in. I used to gloss over that because I just assumed it was pretty straightforward, but I always get questions about it. So thought I threw that out there just in case, and hopefully that clears everything up for your homework.